I looked the man who promised to keep me safe in the eye and told him my abusive ex hit harder. Have you ever been betrayed by the one person on this earth who swore they would always protect you? Because that one sentence wasn't the start of the problem. It was the explosive end to a quiet one-year war waged against me by his mother, a war he let her win, until I decided to fight back. It's a peculiar truth that the things you believe will shatter you into a million pieces often don't. For the longest time, the most violent sound I could imagine was the sharp, cracking echo of a fist connecting with drywall, just inches from my face. I thought the most profound and terrifying silence in the universe was the one that immediately followed. That breathless, suspended moment in the air when your own heartbeat thunders in your ears, and you don't know what will come next. I survived 2 full years of my life learning the intricate, agonizing rhythms of that specific brand of terror with my ex-boyfriend, Derek. When I finally clawed my way out of that relationship, a ghost of myself, I made a solemn vow. I would never again allow myself to be in a room or a life that felt that way. All I craved was peace, a quiet, gentle, gloriously boring kind of love. And then, like an answer to a prayer I didn't even know I'd been making, I met Mark. Mark was the antithesis of Derek in every conceivable way. He was a software engineer, a man whose world was built on the clean, predictable elegance of code and the steady progression of logic. He was calm in a way that seemed to soak into my own frayed nerve endings. He was steady. When he stepped into my life, it was as if the entire world, which for so long had been tilted on a violent, unpredictable axis, finally, blessedly, righted itself. The safety he offered was not just a feeling, it was a tangible presence. I remember the first time I told him about Derek. We were sitting in his car, parked by a lake on a cool autumn evening. The story came out of me in broken pieces, a stumbling, shameful confession I was terrified would brand me as permanently damaged goods. I watched his face in the dim glow of the dashboard lights, expecting to see a flicker of judgment, of revulsion, of fear. Instead, he just listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't pepper me with questions. He just let me empty all the poison out. When the last of my whispered, ugly words faded into the quiet of the car, he simply took my hand, placed it over his heart so I could feel the strong, even rhythm beneath his shirt, and said, "You're safe now, Chloe. I will never, ever let anyone or anything make you feel that way again." And I believed him. My God, I believed him with every broken piece of my soul. His promise became the new foundation upon which I rebuilt my entire world. For 3 wonderful years, his love was the very air I breathed. We found this apartment in Charlotte, a place with big windows and warm hardwood floors, and we filled it with laughter and the smell of coffee, and the comfortable silence of 2 people who were perfectly at home with each other. My graphic design business, which had been a struggling side hustle, finally blossomed because for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't living in a constant state of fight or flight. I had the mental and emotional space to be creative, to take risks. He was my greatest cheerleader, my quiet anchor that gave my kite the freedom to soar. We were happy. Not a performative, social media kind of happy, but a genuine, deep-in-your-bones happiness. The kind that makes you feel invincible, which is precisely why I never saw the storm that was gathering just over the horizon. Or perhaps a more honest version is that I saw the clouds, and I simply chose to believe they were harmless. The storm, I would come to learn, had a name. Sharon. His mother. Our first formal introduction was for dinner at his parents' house. It was a sprawling, immaculate colonial in one of those leafy, old-money suburbs where the silence feels curated. The air inside smelled of lemon polish, potpourri, and a quiet, unassailable sense of superiority. I was, of course, a wreck. My desire for his family to love me was a physical ache in my chest. I chose my outfit with the precision of a bomb disposal expert, settling on a navy blue dress that screamed inoffensive. I brought a bottle of wine that cost more than my weekly groceries and mentally rehearsed a list of benign conversation topics. The evening started smoothly enough. His father, a quiet man named Thomas, was kind in a distant way, asking about my work with what seemed like genuine if mild interest. But Sharon was a master of a particular kind of social performance. She possessed a smile that was perfectly shaped, radiant even, but it never once touched her eyes. Her eyes were small, a pale, piercing blue, like chips of ice. They were constantly scanning, evaluating, probing for a weakness. The attack, when it came, was a masterpiece of passive aggression, delivered with the precision of a surgeon. We were all seated around a dining table so polished I could see my own anxious reflection in its surface. "So, Chloe," she began, her voice a silken purr that instantly put me on high alert. "Mark tells us you're a graphic designer. How absolutely lovely. It must be so much fun to have a little hobby that actually pays for itself." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I felt Mark physically stiffen next to me. A hobby. She had reduced my 60-hour work weeks, my hard-won clients, my sleepless nights wrestling with code and creative blocks, the sheer, unadulterated grit it took to build a business from scratch to the equivalent of needlepoint. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck, but I forced a bright, tight smile. "It's a bit more than a hobby, Sharon. It's my career. I'm self-employed. I run my own business." "Oh, of course you do, dear," she said, waving a perfectly manicured hand as if shooing away a fly. "Whatever you want to call it. I just think it's so commendable that Mark has such a stable, important job at the bank. It gives him the freedom to support his partners, well, their creative pursuits. It's a very generous position to be in." And there it was. The opening salvo. The first carefully aimed dart, dipped in the poison of her condescension. The message was crystalline. You are not one of us. You are a frivolous arts and crafts girl, a financial liability, a flighty dependent my son is noble enough to indulge. Mark, to his credit, jumped in. "Mom, that's not fair. Chloe is incredibly successful. She works harder than anyone I know." Sharon turned her brilliant, icy smile on him, completely deflecting his defense. "Of course she does, my sweet boy. You always see the very best in everyone. It's your most wonderful and sometimes most vulnerable quality." And just like that, with a breathtaking sleight of hand, she had twisted his attempt to defend me into a compliment about his own virtuous, perhaps naive nature. She had reinforced her narrative. I was the questionable choice, and he was the generous soul who had chosen me. I spent the remainder of the dinner mechanically moving food around my plate, the taste of humiliation coating my tongue. I felt small, dismissed, and profoundly lonely, even sitting next to the man I loved. On the long, quiet drive back to our apartment, Mark reached over and took my hand. "Hey," he said softly, "don't pay any attention to my mom. She's just from a different generation. She doesn't get the whole freelance, work-from-home world. She honestly means well. She means well." The three most dangerous words in the English language. They weren't an explanation. They were a shield. A shield he used to protect her, and a cage he was slowly, unconsciously starting to build around me. It was the first time I realized that his promise to keep me safe might not apply when the threat was coming from inside his own family. That first dinner was not an isolated incident. It was the first shot fired in what I would later come to understand was a quiet, systematic, and devastatingly effective war. Sharon's objective was chillingly simple: to methodically and relentlessly dismantle my confidence, my relationship with her son, and my very place in his life, until I was so broken and isolated that I would simply vanish. Her methods were insidious, a masterclass in psychological warfare. They were a collection of small dismissive acts and veiled insults, each one designed to be just subtle enough that if I complained, I would sound petty, oversensitive, and hysterical. That was her particular brand of genius. She waged her war in the gray territory of plausible deniability, expertly making me feel like I was the one who was crazy for being upset. The food incident became a recurring theme. At the next family gathering, a barbecue, I had reminded Mark a week in advance. Please just make sure there's something, anything I can eat. A plain salad, a baked potato, anything. He promised he would. Yet, when we arrived, the air was thick with the smoke of grilling sausages and hamburgers. The table was laden with potato salad laced with bacon, macaroni, and cheese, and a 7-layer dip. The only vegetarian-friendly option was a bowl of iceberg lettuce. When I asked if there was any dressing, Sharon beamed and pointed to 2 bottles, creamy bacon ranch and chunky blue cheese. She looked at me with wide, innocent eyes. Oh dear. Did Mark not tell you to bring something for yourself? He knows how particular your diet is. She made it sound like a complex medical condition, not a simple dietary choice. I spent the afternoon nursing a lukewarm soda, the gnawing hunger in my stomach a dull echo of the deeper humiliation. I saw the look in her eye as she watched me from across the lawn. It wasn't a mistake. It was a checkmate. Then the phone calls, her primary weapon of intrusion, began in earnest. If Mark and I were out, his phone would vibrate with her ringtone, a jaunty, irritating tune that began to sound like an air raid siren to me. We'd be in the middle of a movie, and the screen would light up his face. Mom. We'd be at a restaurant having a rare, intimate conversation, and the buzzing on the table would shatter the moment. Her emergencies were always vague, always urgent. A sudden, debilitating migraine. A strange noise she thought she heard in the basement. An inability to figure out how to work the new television remote. A task she had previously mastered. They were never genuine crises, but they were presented with a breathless, theatrical panic designed to trigger Mark's guilt. "I'm so sorry, babe," he would say, his face a mask of worry and frustration. "I just have to go check on her. It'll only be a minute. You know how she gets." We left countless movies halfway through, abandoned dinners before the check arrived, and our quiet, sacred evenings at home were constantly punctured by her manufactured needs. I was no longer just in a relationship with Mark. I was the third wheel in a tense, crowded triad with Mark and his mother's bottomless well of anxieties. He was so enmeshed, he couldn't see that her anxiety was not a condition. It was a tool of control. Her true masterpiece of manipulation, the act that revealed the depth of her strategic cruelty, came about a year into this Cold War. We were planning to host our first big holiday party. It was a huge deal for me. It was a symbol of our life together, a chance to blend our friends and officially present ourselves as a solid, happy unit. I spent weeks planning every detail. When Sharon heard about it, she immediately insisted on helping. She framed it as a mother-daughter bonding opportunity. "We girls have to stick together," she chirped over the phone, her voice so full of false bonhomie it made my teeth ache. Against my better judgment, I relented. I gave her a single, simple, foolproof task: pick up the custom cake I had designed, ordered, and paid for from a small, artisanal bakery I loved. That was it. I texted her the address, the pickup time, a picture of the confirmation email. The day of the party, an hour before our guests were due to arrive, the apartment filled with the scent of mulled wine and my own nervous energy, Sharon waltzed in. She was carrying a large, flimsy cardboard box from a generic supermarket. Inside was a garish, overly sweet sheet cake, slathered in a chemical-tasting white frosting. "Happy Holidays," was scrawled across it in an ugly, bleeding red gel. I just stared at it, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. "Sharon, what is this?" I asked, my voice a tight, strangled whisper. "Where is the cake I ordered?" "Well, dear," she said, placing the monstrosity on my kitchen island with a proud, definitive thud. "I went to that little bakery you mentioned, and I took one look at the cake. It was so small, and frankly, a bit pretentious, don't you think? For what they were charging, it was absolute highway robbery. I know you two are trying to save for the future, and I knew you were worried about the party budget, so I made a responsible executive decision and got this one instead. It's much bigger, feeds more people, and it was a fraction of the price. You can thank me later. I felt a wave of dizziness. She hadn't saved me money. The custom cake was non-refundable, a fact she surely knew. She had deliberately sabotaged a centerpiece of my party, framed her sabotage as a thoughtful favor, insulted my taste, and infantilized me as someone who couldn't manage a budget, all in one breathtakingly audacious move. When Mark came home from a last-minute errand, she recounted the story to him with her own masterful spin. Chloe had her heart set on this tiny, ridiculously expensive cake, Mark. I was just trying to be practical and help her save a little money for your future together. She seems a bit upset with me now. I think I may have hurt her feelings. Mark looked from her earnest, concerned face to my furious, tear-streaked one, and he did what he always did. He took the path of least resistance. He chose comfort over truth. "It's just a cake, Chloe," he said, his voice soft and pleading. "I know it's not what you wanted, but she was just trying to help. Let's not make a big deal out of it in front of all our friends." A cold, heavy dread settled in my heart. It was never about the cake. It was about the utter lack of respect. It was about the lie. It was about the fact that I was standing next to the woman who had deliberately and maliciously undermined me, and the man who had promised to be my shield was telling me to lower my sword and accept the blow, to keep the peace. Sharon watched this exchange, and her lips curved into the faintest, almost imperceptible smirk. It was the look of a general watching her battle plan unfold to perfection. She was winning. She was systematically isolating me, and Mark was handing her the very tools she needed to do it. The final escalation before the catastrophic end was the most poisonous of all. It was a lie, pure, simple, and crafted for maximum damage. A few weeks after the cake incident, the air in our apartment was thick with unspoken resentment. Mark came home late one evening after having dinner with his mother alone. I knew something was wrong the moment he walked through the door. His usual easy smile was gone. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He moved around the kitchen with a tense, brittle energy. "What is it?" I finally asked, my stomach twisting into a familiar knot of anxiety. He took a deep breath and finally looked at me. His eyes were full of a pained, weary confusion that I'd never seen directed at me before. "I was at Mom's tonight," he started, his voice low and strained. "And she told me something. She seemed really reluctant to even bring it up, said she didn't want to cause trouble." He paused, rubbing his temples as if staving off a headache. "She said she called you the other day to ask about some ideas for my birthday gift. And she said you were... Well, she said you were incredibly rude to her. She said you told her to mind her own business and that you had it handled, and then you hung up on her." I felt the blood drain from my face. My mind frantically scrolled back through the week. It was a complete, stunning fabrication. She hadn't called me. I hadn't spoken a single word to her since the party. It was a ghost conversation, a phantom fight she had invented out of thin air to paint me as an antagonist. "Mark, that never, ever happened," I said, my voice shaking with the force of my shock. "She did not call me. I swear to you on my life that conversation did not take place." "She seemed really hurt, Chloe," he said, his voice laced with exhaustion. He was already tired of this fight that hadn't even started. "She was almost in tears. She said she was just trying to be involved, to be nice, and that you shut her down completely." "She is lying, Mark. Why would I do that? Why would I possibly do that?" I was pleading now, my voice rising in pitch. The injustice was so blatant, so absolute, it was making me dizzy. "Look at my phone. Look at my call logs. Her number is not there." "I don't want to look at your phone, Chloe," he said, and this was the part that truly broke a piece of my heart. He waved his hand dismissively, as if the very idea of seeking proof was beneath him. I wish you two could just get along. That's all I want. It would make my life so much easier if you would just try a little harder with her. Maybe she misunderstood something. He didn't believe me. Or rather, it was far, far easier for him to believe that I, the woman he supposedly loved, was being difficult, rude, and dishonest, than it was for him to confront the terrifying, world-altering possibility that his own mother was a malicious, manipulative liar. He was asking me to apologize for a conversation that never happened. He was asking me to take responsibility for her psychotic fantasy. That night, for the first time, the safety I felt with him didn't just fracture, it shattered. I looked at the man I loved, and I saw a stranger. I saw a man whose loyalty had a clear and painful boundary. I realized his promise to keep me safe had a silent, unwritten clause. As long as it doesn't inconvenience me or force me to have an uncomfortable conversation with my mother. I felt utterly, terrifyingly, and completely alone. The breaking point, when it finally arrived, was not a quiet fracture in the foundation of our life. It was a seismic, earth-shattering explosion that leveled everything in its path. And it happened, fittingly, at Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving was Sharon's kingdom. It was her annual command performance, a meticulously staged production where she was the director, producer, and undisputed star of the show. Her entire extended family was always in attendance. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and their spouses. A built-in jury of people who only knew me through the carefully filtered, subtly biased narratives Sharon had been feeding them for years. I was already on edge before we even left our apartment. After the phantom phone call incident, my relationship with Mark had been operating on life support. We moved through our days with a brittle, excruciating politeness. The unspoken tension was a third, suffocating presence in every room. I walked into that house armed with a smile so bright and so fake it felt like it might crack my face. I was on a mission. I would be the perfect girlfriend. I would be endlessly polite. I would be unfailingly helpful. I would be so utterly, flawlessly unimpeachable that not even Sharon, in all her malevolent creativity, could find a single flaw. It was, of course, a fool's errand. You cannot win a game that is rigged against you. The ambush came, as it always did, when my guard was at its lowest. It was after the massive dinner, during the dessert course. Everyone had migrated to the living room, holding plates of pumpkin pie and cups of coffee. The atmosphere was warm, drowsy, and thick with the smell of cinnamon and roasting turkey. I had found a small, out-of-the-way ottoman to sit on, feeling blessedly anonymous for the first time all day. I took a deep breath and allowed myself to relax for just a single, precious second. That was my mistake. Sharon, holding court from her favorite plush armchair, cleared her throat with a soft, attention-grabbing sound. The low hum of conversation in the room immediately died down. "You know," she began, her voice carrying across the room with the practiced ease of a public speaker. "I was having the most fascinating conversation with my sister Beverly the other day. We were talking about relationships, and the psychology of it all is just so interesting." She paused, her icy blue eyes sweeping the room to ensure she had everyone's rapt attention. Then, her gaze landed on me, and it stayed there. Beverly's daughter, as you know, is a therapist, and she was explaining that it's actually very common for women who have been in, let's say, volatile relationships in the past, to subconsciously seek out drama in their new ones. It's like they become accustomed to the chaos, you see? They simply don't know how to exist in a peaceful, healthy, stable environment. The room went utterly and completely silent. Every single eye in that room turned to me. I could feel the blood draining from my face, a cold, prickling sensation spreading across my skin. She wasn't just talking about some abstract psychological theory from a textbook. She was talking about me. She was talking about Derek. She was taking the most painful, humiliating, and traumatic experience of my entire life, and she was turning it into a piece of fascinating dinner party gossip, a juicy psychological tidbit for her family's morbid entertainment. She wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her voice dropping into a tone of sickening, feigned concern. I'm just so incredibly thankful that my Mark is such a strong, stable man. Lord knows it takes a special kind of patience to be with someone who has, well, someone with that kind of history. We've all been a little worried for him, of course, but we just pray every day that Chloe can eventually learn to embrace the peace and stability that he offers her. It was a breathtaking act of cruelty. It was character assassination disguised as maternal concern. In the space of 30 seconds, she had painted me as a broken, damaged, drama-addicted creature, a walking red flag, a charity case that her heroic, long-suffering son had so nobly taken on. She had weaponized my deepest trauma, the secret I had entrusted to her son in a moment of ultimate vulnerability, and she had paraded it in front of his entire family as if it were a curious circus act. I looked at Mark. My eyes were screaming at him, begging him. Say something. Do something. Stand up. Shout, "That's enough, Mom!" Fulfill the promise you made to me in the car by the lake 3 years ago. Be the man I thought you were. Be my shield. He did nothing. He just stared down at the remnants of his slice of pie, his knuckles white as he gripped his fork. He wouldn't meet my gaze. He was a statue carved from cowardice. He was letting it happen. He was choosing the path of least resistance, the path of his own comfort, even if that path was being paved directly over my shattered soul. In that single, silent, terrible moment, something inside of me didn't just break. It vaporized. The love, the trust, the 3 years of carefully constructed safety, it all turned to ash and blew away. I stood up, my body trembling with a force I couldn't control, and without saying a single word, I walked out of the room. I grabbed my coat and my purse from the hook by the door, the movements jerky and robotic, and I left the house. I didn't wait for him. I didn't look back. The drive home was a 20-minute blur of hot, angry tears and a white-hot rage that seemed to burn behind my eyes. I got back to our apartment, the place that was supposed to be our sanctuary, and the silence inside was heavy and suffocating. He arrived 20 minutes later. He walked in, closing the door softly behind him, the very picture of a man cautiously approaching a wounded animal, a man trying to de-escalate a situation he had single-handedly allowed to spiral into a Category 5 hurricane. "Chloe," he started, his voice soft and placating, the voice he used when trying to soothe a child. "Look, I know you're upset. She shouldn't have said that stuff. It was out of line." Upset? I wheeled on him, my voice a low, dangerous hiss I didn't recognize as my own. Upset? Mark, she took my history of being physically abused and she announced it like it was a fun fact at a dinner party. She diagnosed me as a drama addict because a man used to beat me. And you just sat there. You did nothing. You said nothing. You let her. "What was I supposed to do, Chloe?" he said, his voice finally rising in frustration, the victimhood already creeping in. "Flip over the dessert table? Make a huge scene in front of my entire family on Thanksgiving? Sometimes you just have to pick your battles. Sometimes, for the sake of peace, you just have to let things go." For the sake of peace, his peace, not mine, his comfort, his desperate, pathetic desire to avoid confrontation at any cost. He was asking me to quietly absorb the poison so he didn't have to deal with the messy fallout of an antidote. He was asking me to endure emotional violence silently, to be the bigger person while he was being the smallest man I had ever seen. And in that moment, my brain, addled with pain and rage, made a horrifying, instantaneous, and devastatingly clear connection. The words erupted out of me before I could even think to stop them. They were born of years of quiet, physical pain with Derek and months of simmering psychological resentment with him and his mother. "Let it go?" I laughed, a sharp, broken, ugly sound. "You want me to just take it? To just sit there and be emotionally gutted for sport? You know what, Mark?" I took a deliberate step closer, my eyes locked on his, forcing him to see the abyss that had opened up between us. "My ex, Derek. The one your mother is so morbidly fascinated by. He hit me. He put his hands on me. He threw things. And you know what the sickest part of this whole thing is?" My voice dropped to a whisper laced with all the venom and all the pain I had been storing up for a year. It was a whisper that was louder than any scream. "At least when he hit me, it was quick. He hit harder, but this hurts worse. This slow, constant, systematic erosion of my sanity by your mother, and this deafening, cowardly silence from you as you watch her do it. This is 1,000 times more painful than a punch in the face ever was." The silence that followed this declaration was nothing like the ones I had known with Derek. This was a new, terrible species of silence. It was the sound of a universe imploding. It was the sound of a foundation turning to dust. The words hung in the air between us, shimmering with a terrible, irreversible power. Mark's face went completely, utterly blank. There was no anger, no sadness, not even a flicker of shock. It was a void. It was as if I had spoken in a language he had never heard, and the meaning was so catastrophic that his entire emotional circuit board had shorted out to protect itself from the overload. He looked right through me, as if I had just become a ghost in our own home, a phantom he could no longer see. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just blinked slowly, once, a long, languid blink that seemed to last an eternity. Then he turned, his movements stiff and robotic, and walked to the small table by the door. He picked up his keys. He bent down and picked up the jacket he had just thrown over a chair. "Where are you going?" I whispered, the rage suddenly draining out of me, replaced by a cold, terrifying dread that was all too familiar. He didn't answer me. He didn't even look at me. He just walked to the door, opened it, and paused in the doorway, his back to me, a silhouette against the hallway light. I can't do this," he said, his voice flat and distant, the voice of a complete stranger. And then he was gone. The door clicked shut, a soft, final sound that echoed through the apartment and through the rest of my life. He vanished into the night. He vanished from my life. I stood frozen in the middle of our living room for what could have been minutes or hours. Time had ceased to have meaning. The only thing that was real was the deafening echo of that clicked door. In the immediate aftermath, I was awash in a sickening, gut-wrenching wave of regret. I went too far. I was too cruel. I shouldn't have said it. The insidious gaslighting I had endured for over a year was so deeply embedded in my psyche that my immediate, conditioned response was to blame myself for the explosion. I had been the one to light the match. But as the hours bled into a long, sleepless night, and that night turned into a full, silent day, something began to shift inside me. The regret, the shame, the self-blame, it started to curdle. It slowly, painfully, transformed into a cold, hard, diamond-like clarity. What had I actually said? I hadn't lied. I had told him my absolute, unvarnished truth in the most brutal way possible, because he had left me no other language to use. I had told him that his inaction, his cowardice, his silent complicity in his mother's relentless emotional abuse was more painful, more damaging, more soul-destroying than the physical abuse I had survived. I didn't say it to be cruel. I said it because it was, and is, true. I look back at that night now, and I still wonder, was there another way? Was there a softer, kinder, more palatable way to make him see the truth? What would you have done in my place? When the person who swore to be your protector becomes the silent, passive warden of your pain, allowing someone to chip away at your soul day after day, what do you do? Do you continue to absorb the blows quietly, or do you finally scream? I didn't hear from him for 3 full days. 72 hours of agonizing, ringing silence. My phone remained dark. My thumbs hovered over his name 100 times, my mind drafting and deleting desperate, pleading, apologetic texts. But for the first time in our entire relationship, I refused to be the one to bridge the gap. I refused to apologize for the crime of being hurt. I had spent a year swallowing my pain to make his life easier. I was done. On the 4th day, my phone finally lit up with a text from him. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a question about my well-being. It was a cold, logistical statement. I need to come by on Saturday to get the rest of my things. Mom thinks it's for the best and is helping me find a new place. Mom thinks it's for the best. Of course she did. She had won. She had finally achieved her ultimate goal. She had severed me from her son like a diseased limb. She had her perfect, obedient, unattached boy back. And in that moment, reading those cowardly words, I knew that this was no longer about saving my relationship. It was about saving myself. I spent the next 2 days preparing for his arrival. I didn't just cry anymore. I got angry. And my anger became a clean, righteous fuel. I went through our apartment, our home, our sanctuary, and I systematically erased him from it. I boxed up every single thing he owned: his clothes, his books, his stupid, expensive video game collection, the coffee mug I had bought him that said, "World's okayest engineer." I packed his entire life into neat, manageable brown cardboard boxes. I was performing surgery. I was excising a tumor from my life, and I was going to be meticulous about it. When Saturday came, I was ready. I showered, did my makeup, and put on an outfit that made me feel strong. I was calm. When he knocked on the door at 2 p.m. right on time, I took a deep, steadying breath before I opened it. My heart still stuttered for a painful second. He wasn't alone. Sharon was standing right behind him, her hand placed proprietorially on his arm, a look of somber, performative support etched onto her face. She was here to supervise the final extraction, to stand guard and make sure I didn't try any last-minute emotional appeals. The audacity of it was almost comical. "Chloe," Mark started, his voice rough and hesitant. "I know," I said, my own voice surprisingly even and cool. It didn't betray the frantic hammering of my heart. "Your things are by the couch. It's all packed and ready to go." They stepped inside. Mark's eyes widened slightly as he saw the neatly stacked, labeled boxes. I don't know what he expected. For me to be a sobbing, incoherent mess on the floor, begging him to stay. For his things to be scattered, a testament to my heartbroken chaos. Sharon, however, looked undeniably smug. She walked around the apartment with the air of a victorious general inspecting a conquered territory, her eyes scanning for any sign of my distress. As Mark and his mother began the silent, awkward process of carrying the boxes out to his car, a quiet, righteous fury solidified in my chest. I was not going to let them leave with her victory so absolute. I was not going to let him walk out of my life believing that I was the crazy one, the broken one, the one who had destroyed everything with one monstrously cruel sentence. When they had moved the last box, they stood together in the doorway, a united front ready to leave my life for good. "Mark, wait," I said. My voice didn't shake. It was as clear as a bell. He turned, his face a miserable mask of exhaustion and confusion. Sharon stood beside him, her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of impatience and triumph. She was ready for the final, pathetic plea. She was about to be very disappointed. "Before you go," I said, looking directly at Mark, but speaking loudly and clearly enough for his mother to hear every single word. "I want you to understand something. I never lied to you. Not once. And I was never, ever rude to your mother." Sharon let out a theatrical scoff. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Chloe, don't start with the dramatics. Just let the boy go in peace." "I'm not being dramatic," I said, my voice dropping to a cool, factual tone as I pulled my phone from my pocket. I swiped to a specific screen recording I had saved in a folder labeled Evidence. You see, after the phantom phone call incident, I had a very strong feeling that I needed to start protecting myself from your mother's creativity. So at Thanksgiving, just as she was launching into her little speech about my psychological state, I just happened to turn my phone's voice memo feature on. It was right here in my lap. The audio is surprisingly clear, given the acoustics of the room. I saw the color instantly drain from Sharon's perfectly made-up face. Her smugness vanished, replaced by a flash of pure animal panic. Mark's eyes widened, a dawning horror spreading across his features. "I have a perfect high-quality recording, Sharon," I continued, my voice as cold and sharp as ice, "of you calling me a drama addict, of you broadcasting my personal private trauma to your entire family as a fun conversation piece, of you saying how worried you all were for your son. It's all right here. I was actually thinking of sending it to the whole family in a group email. You know, just for the sake of clarification, since you all seem so deeply interested in my psychology." Sharon was completely speechless. Her mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. She looked utterly, beautifully horrified. "And Mark," I said, finally turning the full force of my attention to him, "the saddest part of all of this is that you never needed this recording. The man I thought I was in love with, the man who made me that promise by the lake, he would have believed me. He would have defended me without needing a tape recording as proof. The fact that you let it get to this point, the fact that your first, second, and last instinct was always to believe her and to manage me, that's the real reason we're over. It's not because of one sentence I said in anger. It's because of 3 long years of sentences you failed to say in my defense." I looked from Mark's shocked and crumbling face to Sharon's pale, terrified one, and for the first time, I saw them both clearly. I saw her for what she was, a weak, deeply insecure woman, so terrified of losing control over her son that she would burn down anyone who got too close. And I saw him for what he was, a boy still hopelessly tethered to her by invisible strings, a man who had sacrificed my heart and my sanity on the altar of his own comfort. "Get out of my apartment," I said, and the words were not a request. They were a command, full of a finality that was absolute and cleansing. Mark just stared at me, his mouth agape, as if he were seeing me for the very first time. Sharon, completely defeated and exposed, pulled on his arm and practically dragged him out the door, away from the scene of her own immolation. I closed the door behind them, and this time, the soft click was the most satisfying, most liberating sound I had ever heard in my life. It was not the sound of loneliness. It was the sound of freedom. It was the sound of my own life, finally, beginning again. That was 6 months ago. I moved out of that apartment and into a bright, airy studio in a different part of the city, a place that is all mine, filled with my art and my plants and my peace. My business is thriving in a way it never has before. I am surrounded by friends who love me, who respect me, and who would go to war for me. The silence in my home is no longer a weapon used against me. It is a gift I give to myself. It's a profound, healing peace, a peace I fought for, and a peace I earned. I learned that the loudest thing in the world isn't a fist hitting a wall, and it isn't a cruel insult screamed across a room. It's the quiet, steady sound of your own voice, finally speaking your truth, no matter the cost. And some things, some relationships, once they are shattered, are not meant to be painstakingly glued back together again. They are meant to be swept away, discarded, so that you can build something stronger, something healthier, and something infinitely more beautiful in their place.